The dust never settled in Redemption Creek. It hung in the air like a crimson veil, painting everything the color of dried blood under the merciless sun of 1873. The town sprawled across the Nevada desert like a wounded animal, its wooden buildings bleached and warped by heat and time. Main Street was little more than a rutted trail between ramshackle structures, the general store with its crooked sign, the sheriff's office that stood mostly empty, and at the heart of it all, the Silver Dollar Saloon. Eleanor May Whitfield stood behind the bar, mechanically wiping down glasses that would never truly be clean. At 22, she had the kind of beauty that the harsh frontier life hadn't quite managed to steal away, though it had certainly tried. Her auburn hair, once her mother's pride, was now pulled back in a severe bun. Her green eyes, which folks said could stop a man in his tracks, held shadows that went deeper than the desert wells. "Ellie, table 4 needs whiskey," growled Samuel Hackett, the saloon's owner, from his usual spot near the till. He was a man who'd grown fat on other people's misfortunes, with hands that grabbed too much and eyes that saw women as inventory. She moved through the smoky haze, past card tables where men gambled away money they didn't have, to where 4 cattle drivers sat. Their eyes followed her movements, lingering where they shouldn't. She'd learned to make herself small, to move like a ghost, but in a place like the Silver Dollar, there was no real hiding. The night wore on as they always did, a blur of rough laughter, clinking glasses, and the occasional fist fight. Eleanor worked until her feet ached and her smile felt painted on. When the last patron finally stumbled out into the pre-dawn darkness, she climbed the narrow stairs to her room above the saloon. It wasn't much, a cot, a wash basin, and a small window that looked out over the endless desert. She sat on the edge of her bed, still fully dressed, and stared at the vast emptiness beyond. Sleep was a luxury she couldn't afford. Every time she closed her eyes, the past came rushing back, her parents' faces before the fever took them, the orphanage where she'd learned that kindness was weakness, and worse memories that she kept locked away in the darkest corners of her mind. "I've never slept peacefully," she whispered to the darkness, a confession to no one. The desert wind rattled her window, carrying with it the distant howl of coyotes. She wrapped her mother's old shawl tighter around her shoulders and waited for dawn, as she did every night. 3 days later, the stranger rode in. Jake Sullivan had been riding for 2 weeks straight, driving a small herd of cattle to market with nothing but his horse, his rifle, and the ghosts of his own making for company. The Wyoming winter had finally released its grip, and he'd taken the job moving cattle south, needing the money but mostly needing the distance. He was tall in the saddle, over 6 feet when he stood, with shoulders broadened by years of ranch work. The sun had weathered his face into sharp angles and deep lines. Though he was only 31, his dark hair hung past his collar, and a week's worth of stubble covered his jaw. But it was his eyes that people remembered, gray like storm clouds, holding secrets he'd never tell. Jake tied his horse to the hitching post outside the Silver Dollar, his movements economical, practiced. He'd been in 100 towns just like Redemption Creek, knew them all by heart. The same desperate people, the same broken dreams, the same watered-down whiskey. The saloon was quieter in the afternoon, just a few locals nursing drinks and avoiding the heat. He chose a table in the corner where he could see both doors. Old habits from his days as an Army scout before the war went bad and took things from him that couldn't be replaced. Eleanor was refilling the whiskey bottles when he walked in. Something about the way he moved caught her attention. Not the swagger of the typical cowboy or the predatory stalk of men like Hackett, but a careful, measured gait, like a man who knew the weight of his own steps. "What'll it be?" she asked, approaching his table with practiced caution. He looked up at her, and for a moment, something passed between them, a recognition of sorts. Though they'd never met, he saw the wariness in her stance, the way she kept the tray between them like a shield. She saw the loneliness that clung to him like trail dust. "Just water, if you have it," he said, his voice rough from the road. "And maybe some of whatever's in that pot on the stove if it won't kill me." "It's stew," she said. "Might kill you slower than a bullet, but faster than old age. The corner of his mouth twitched. Not quite a smile, but close. "I'll take my chances." She brought him water in a relatively clean glass and a bowl of the questionable stew. He thanked her with a nod and ate slowly, his eyes scanning the room with the instinct of a man who'd learned to always know where the exits were. Eleanor found herself stealing glances at him as she worked. There was something different about this one, a stillness that seemed to create its own space in the chaotic saloon. When Hackett barked at her to stop dawdling, she flushed and hurried away, but not before catching the stranger's frown at the owner's tone. As evening approached and the saloon began to fill, Jake nursed his second glass of water and watched. He'd meant to move on after eating, but something kept him in his chair. Maybe it was the exhaustion of the trail, or maybe it was the girl with the green eyes who moved through the crowd like she was navigating a minefield. The trouble started around 9 o'clock. "Ellie, sweetheart, why don't you come sit with us a while?" The voice belonged to Tom Morrison, a local ranch hand who'd been drinking since noon. He grabbed Eleanor's wrist as she passed, pulling her off balance. "I'm working." "Tom," she said, trying to keep her voice light even as panic fluttered in her chest. "Let me go." "Oh, come on. Hackett won't mind if you're nice to paying customers." His grip tightened, and his friends laughed. She'd been through this before, knew how it would play out, make too much fuss, and Hackett would blame her for disturbing the customers. "Don't make enough fuss, and—" The lady said, "Let go." The voice cut through the noise like a knife. Jake had risen from his table, moving with that same deliberate calm. He wasn't reaching for his gun, didn't need to. The promise of violence hung in the air around him like smoke. Morrison's face flushed red. "This ain't your business, stranger. I'm making it my business." Jake stepped closer, and Morrison involuntarily loosened his grip on Eleanor's wrist. "Now, you can let the lady go and apologize, or we can take this outside. Your choice." For a moment, the saloon held its breath. Then Morrison released Eleanor with a muttered curse and turned back to his drink. His friends suddenly found their cards very interesting. Eleanor stood frozen, her wrist throbbing where Morrison had gripped it. The stranger, Jake, looked at her with those storm cloud eyes. "You all right, miss?" She nodded, not trusting her voice. No one had ever, not once in the 2 years she'd worked here, stood up for her like that. "Good." He touched the brim of his hat and returned to his table as if nothing had happened. But something had changed in the atmosphere of the Silver Dollar. Hackett glowered from behind the bar. Morrison and his friends muttered darkly into their drinks, and Eleanor moved through the rest of her shift feeling like the world had tilted slightly on its axis. When closing time finally came and the last drunk had been ushered out, Eleanor found Jake still sitting at his table, hat pulled low over his eyes. She approached cautiously. "We're closed, mister." He looked up. "I know. Just wanted to make sure you got through the night without any more trouble." The simple kindness of it nearly undid her. She'd built walls around herself so high and thick that she'd forgotten what it felt like when someone showed genuine concern. "I'm fine," she said, the lie automatic. "Been handling men like Morrison for years." "Shouldn't have to," he said simply. They stood there in the empty saloon, dust motes dancing in the lamplight between them. Finally. Jake stood, settling his hat on his head. "I'll be moving on in the morning," he said. "You take care of yourself, miss." She watched him walk to the door, his spurs ringing against the floorboards. At the threshold, he paused and looked back. "What's your name?" "Eleanor," she said softly. "Eleanor Whitfield. Jake Sullivan." He touched his hat brim again. "Good night, Eleanor." After he left, she stood alone in the empty saloon, her wrist still aching from Morrison's grip. But for the first time in longer than she could remember, the coming night didn't seem quite so dark. She climbed the stairs to her room, sat at her window, and looked out at the desert under the stars. Somewhere out there, Jake Sullivan was bedding down under those same stars, and the thought gave her an odd comfort. She didn't know why a stranger's simple act of decency should affect her so deeply, but as she wrapped her mother's shawl around her shoulders and prepared for another sleepless night, she found herself whispering a different truth to the darkness. "I've never slept peacefully, but tonight feels different." The desert wind carried her words away, out to where a lone cowboy lay awake, wondering why he couldn't get a pair of green eyes out of his mind. The morning sun had barely crested the horizon when Jake Sullivan walked back into the Silver Dollar. Eleanor was sweeping the floor, trying to erase the evidence of last night's revelry. She looked up, startled, the broom clattering from her hands. "I thought you were leaving," she said, bending quickly to retrieve the broom, using the motion to hide the unexpected flutter in her chest. "Changed my mind." Jake stood in the doorway, his silhouette dark against the bright morning light. "That Morrison fellow and his friends were talking when I passed them this morning. Don't much like what I heard." Eleanor's hands tightened on the broom handle. She knew what men like Morrison said about her, had heard the whispers and cruel laughter. It's nothing new. Maybe not, but that doesn't make it right. Jake stepped inside, removing his hat. "Where's Hackett? Sleeping off last night's profits?" she said bitterly. "Won't be up for hours." They stood there in the empty saloon, morning light streaming through the dusty windows. Eleanor felt exposed, vulnerable without the night's shadows to hide in. Her dress, mended too many times, seemed shabbier in the daylight. She was acutely aware of the dark circles under her eyes, the exhaustion that clung to her like a second skin. "When's the last time you had a proper meal?" Jake asked suddenly. The question surprised her. Yesterday. I think maybe the day before." He frowned. "There's a boarding house 2 streets over. Mrs. Caldwell serves breakfast. Come on. I can't just leave. You're not on the clock yet, and Hackett's dead to the world. Come on, Eleanor. Let me buy you breakfast." She wanted to refuse, knew she should refuse. In her world, nothing came without a price. But something in his eyes, that steady, storm-gray gaze, made her set down the broom. The boarding house was a different world from the Silver Dollar. Clean tablecloths, windows with actual curtains, and the smell of fresh biscuits and coffee. Mrs. Caldwell, a widow in her 50s with kind eyes, seated them without comment, though Eleanor caught the questioning look she gave Jake. "Eat," Jake said when the food arrived. Eggs, bacon, biscuits with butter and honey. More food than Eleanor usually saw in a week. She ate slowly at first, then with increasing hunger as her body remembered what it was like to be properly fed. Jake sipped his coffee and watched the street outside, giving her the dignity of not watching her devour the meal. "Why are you doing this?" she asked finally, when her plate was nearly empty. He was quiet for a long moment. "Maybe because I know what it's like to be alone in a hard world. Maybe because I'm tired of walking past things that ain't right and doing nothing about them. You can't fix my life with breakfast, Mr. Sullivan." "Jake," he corrected. "And I'm not trying to fix anything. Just thought you could use a friend." Friend. The word sat strangely in her mind. She'd had friends once, before the fever took her parents, before the world showed its teeth. They walked back toward the saloon slowly, Eleanor dreading the moment she'd have to return to her prison. As they passed the sheriff's office, Jake noticed her unconscious flinch. "Sheriff Weber's not much help, I take it?" She laughed, a bitter sound. "Sheriff Weber thinks Hackett's money is worth more than doing his job." Jake's jaw tightened. He'd seen plenty of towns where the law was just another word for whoever had the deepest pockets. At the saloon's back door, Eleanor paused. "Thank you for breakfast. And for last night, but you should leave town. Jake, men like Morrison hold grudges, and Hackett doesn't like anyone interfering with his business." "I've faced worse than Morrison and Hackett combined," Jake said quietly. "Besides, my horse threw a shoe this morning. Blacksmith says it'll take a day or 2 to get the right size." It was a lie, and they both knew it. Eleanor felt something loosen in her chest, a knot she'd carried so long she'd forgotten it was there. That night, Jake took up his position at the same corner table, the saloon filled with its usual crowd. But there was a different energy, an awareness of the stranger who'd challenged the unspoken rules of Redemption Creek. Morrison came in around 8, his friends flanking him like guards. He shot dark looks at Jake but kept his distance. Hackett, however, was less subtle. He cornered Eleanor near the bar during a lull. "That drifter's bad for business," he hissed, his breath sour with whiskey. "You encourage him to stay, and you'll regret it, girl. You remember who owns you." The words hit her like a slap. Owned, because that's what she was, property, bought with the promise of a job and a room when she'd had nowhere else to go. She served drinks mechanically after that, her movements jerky, her smile brittle. Jake noticed the change immediately. When she brought him his usual water, he caught her trembling hand. "What did he say to you?" "Nothing. It's nothing." She tried to pull away, but his grip was gentle, steady. "Eleanor," just her name, but the way he said it, like she mattered, like she was more than just another saloon girl, nearly broke her. "Please," she whispered. "You're making things worse." He released her hand, but stood up. "Where's your room?" "What?" "Your room. Where is it?" "Upstairs, but—" "Pack what you need. You're leaving." The words didn't make sense. "I can't just leave. I have nowhere to go. No money." "You'll figure that out tomorrow. Tonight, you're getting out of here." "Jake, you don't understand. Hackett, he'll—" A commotion at the front of the saloon cut her off. Morrison, emboldened by whiskey and wounded pride, was on his feet. "Hey, stranger," he called out. "You think you're some kind of hero? Think you can ride into our town and upset the natural order of things?" The saloon fell silent. Jake turned slowly, his hand nowhere near his gun, but ready nonetheless. "I think a man who has to force his attention on women isn't much of a man at all," Jake replied calmly. Morrison's face flushed red. "You calling me out?" "I'm calling you a coward. There's a difference." The slap of leather clearing holster was loud in the silence, but Jake was faster. His gun was out and aimed before Morrison's cleared leather. "Drop it," Jake said quietly. "This doesn't have to end badly." Morrison's hand shook. Sweat beaded on his forehead. Slowly, he let his gun fall back into its holster. "That's twice you've backed down." Jake said, "There won't be a third time. You touch her again, you even look at her wrong, and we'll settle this permanent—" "Understand." Morrison nodded, his face a mask of humiliation and rage. He and his friends filed out, leaving half-empty glasses on their table. Jake holstered his weapon and turned to find Eleanor staring at him with wide eyes. Behind her, Hackett's face was purple with fury. "You!" Hackett pointed a shaking finger at Jake. "Get out of my establishment, now." "Happy to," Jake replied. He looked at Eleanor. "You coming?" She stood frozen, torn between fear and hope. Years of abuse and survival instincts warred with a desperate need to trust someone. Just once. "Girl, you walk out that door. You don't come back." Hackett snarled. "You'll be on the street by morning. Mark my words." "She'll have a place to stay," Jake said firmly. "Mrs. Caldwell has a room. I already asked." Eleanor's breath caught. He'd already asked. He'd planned for this, thought ahead to what she might need. When was the last time anyone had done that? "My things," she said weakly. "Get 'em. I'll wait." She ran upstairs, her heart pounding. In her small room, she grabbed her few possessions, her mother's shawl, a daguerreotype of her parents, the little money she'd managed to hide from Hackett, a spare dress. Everything she owned fit in a small carpet bag. When she came back down, Jake was still standing where she'd left him, a solid presence in the chaos of her collapsing world. Hackett was screaming threats. The remaining patrons were watching with avid interest, and Eleanor felt like she was stepping off a cliff into empty air. "Ready?" Jake asked. She nodded, not trusting her voice. They walked out together, Hackett's curses following them into the night. The cool air hit Eleanor's face, and she realized she was crying. When had she started crying? "It's all right," Jake said softly. "You're safe now." Mrs. Caldwell was waiting for them, a lamp burning in her window. She took one look at Eleanor's tear-stained face and clucked her tongue. "Poor child. Come in, come in. I've got the room ready, and there's hot water for washing." The room was small but clean, with a real bed instead of a cot, and a window with gingham curtains. Eleanor set her carpetbag down with shaking hands. "I can't pay right away. We'll work it out." "Mrs." Caldwell said firmly, "I could use help with the cooking and cleaning. Fair wages for fair work, not like that devil Hackett." After Mrs. Caldwell left, Eleanor stood in the middle of the room, overwhelmed. Jake hadn't followed them up, maintaining propriety, but she could see him through the window, standing guard on the porch below. She went downstairs and found him there, smoking a cigarette in the darkness. "Why?" she asked. "Why are you doing this?" He was quiet for so long she thought he wouldn't answer. Then, "Had a sister once, Sarah. She was about your age when—" He flicked the cigarette away. "When the war came, I left to fight. Told her I'd keep her safe by fighting for what was right. But the war didn't stay on the battlefields. Raiders came while I was gone. By the time I got back, he didn't finish. Didn't need to. I couldn't save her," he said finally. "But maybe I can do right by you." Eleanor felt the tears start again. "I don't know how to thank you." "No thanks needed. Just get some rest." He looked at her then, really looked at her, and his voice gentled. "When's the last time you slept? Really slept?" "I don't," she admitted. "I can't. Every time I close my eyes—" She shuddered. Jake was quiet for a moment, then said, "My room's next door. If you need anything, if you get scared, you knock on the wall. I'll hear you. You can't stand guard over me forever. Don't need forever. Just tonight." He met her eyes. "Tonight you'll rest in my arms." He caught himself, color rising in his cheeks. "I mean, tonight you'll rest knowing someone's watching over you. You're safe, Eleanor. I promise you that." She wanted to believe him. Standing there on the porch of the boarding house, with the stars spreading across the desert sky, and this strange, kind man promising her safety. She almost could. "Good night, Jake," she whispered. "Good night, Eleanor. Sweet dreams." She climbed the stairs to her room, not Hackett's, and prepared for bed. For the first time in years, she left the lamp burning low instead of sitting up in the darkness. She lay down on the soft bed, pulled her mother's shawl around her shoulders, and listened to the quiet sounds of the night. Next door, she could hear Jake moving around his room, the comforting sound of another human presence. Not threatening, not demanding, just there, standing guard against the darkness. Eleanor closed her eyes, expecting the usual parade of nightmares. Instead, she found herself thinking of gray eyes and steady hands, of promises made and kept, slowly, incredibly. She felt herself drifting towards sleep. Her last conscious thought was wonder at the strange turn her life had taken. This morning she'd been trapped, hopeless. Tonight, she was free, or at least on the path to freedom. All because a lonely cowboy had decided to stand up for what was right. Eleanor woke to sunlight streaming through gingham curtains. For a moment, she lay still, disoriented by the unfamiliar softness of the bed, the clean smell of lavender sachets instead of stale whiskey and smoke. Then memory flooded back, and with it, a mixture of wonder and fear. She had slept, actually slept, not the fitful dozing she'd grown accustomed to, but real, deep sleep. No nightmares had clawed at her. No phantom hands had reached from the darkness. Just peaceful, blessed rest. A knock at the door made her heart leap. "It's Mrs. Caldwell. Dear, breakfast is ready when you are." Eleanor dressed quickly in her spare dress, cleaner than the one she'd worn at the saloon, but still showing signs of too much mending. When she entered the dining room, Jake was already there, hat on the table beside him, talking quietly with Mrs. Caldwell. He stood when he saw her, a gesture of respect she wasn't used to. "Morning, Eleanor. Sleep well." "I did," she admitted, still marveling at the truth of it. "Better than I have in years." "Mrs." Caldwell bustled around, setting a plate before Eleanor. "Eat up, child. We'll discuss work after breakfast. I'm thinking you could help with the rooms in the morning, cooking in the evening. $1 a day plus room and board. Fair?" Eleanor nearly choked on her coffee. At the silver dollar, Hackett had paid her 25 cents a day, and that was when he remembered to pay at all. "More than fair," she managed. "Thank you." After breakfast, Jake suggested a walk. "You need some things from the general store. Can't have you working in worn-out shoes." "I can't accept—" "Consider it a loan if it makes you feel better," he interrupted. "You can pay me back when you're on your feet." They walked through Redemption Creek in the morning light, and Eleanor saw the town differently, without the haze of exhaustion and fear. She noticed things: children playing in the dust, women hanging laundry, the way the mountains rose purple and majestic in the distance. At Henderson's general store, Jake insisted on practical purchases: sturdy shoes, a simple calico dress for work, basic toiletries. Eleanor protested at each item until he fixed her with those steady gray eyes. "Sarah never got the chance to start over," he said quietly. "Let me do this." As they were leaving, laden with packages, Sheriff Weber stepped into their path. He was a thin man who wore his badge like it was too heavy for him, with watery eyes that never quite met anyone's gaze. "Sullivan, isn't it?" Weber said. "Heard there was some trouble at the Silver Dollar last night." "No trouble, Sheriff. Just a man deciding to find better accommodations." Weber shifted uncomfortably. "Hackett's making noise about theft. Says the girl took things that weren't hers." Eleanor went rigid beside Jake, but he placed a calming hand on her arm. "Everything Miss Whitfield took belonged to her, unless Hackett wants to explain to a judge why he thinks he owns the personal effects of his employees. Now, see here." "No, Sheriff, you see here." Jake's voice remained calm, but there was steel beneath it. "Miss Whitfield worked for wages that were barely paid, lived in conditions that weren't fit for animals, and endured treatment that would make decent folks sick. If Hackett wants to push this, I'll be happy to bring in a real lawman from Carson City to investigate his establishment. I'm betting they'd find all sorts of interesting violations." Weber paled. Everyone knew Hackett's saloon operated in gray areas of the law, and too much scrutiny would be bad for everyone's profit margins. I'll tell Hackett to let it be." Weber mumbled, scurrying away. Eleanor released a breath she didn't know she'd been holding. "You can't keep fighting my battles." "Watch me," Jake replied simply. That evening, while Eleanor helped Mrs. Caldwell prepare supper for the boarding house guests, she found herself humming. Actually humming. When was the last time she'd done that? "That cowboy of yours is something special, Mrs. Caldwell observed, kneading bread dough." "He's not my cowboy," Eleanor protested, feeling heat rise in her cheeks. Mrs. Caldwell's knowing smile said she wasn't convinced. "Man doesn't stand up to the whole town for just anybody. And the way he looks at you, how does he look at me? Like you're precious. Like you matter." The older woman's expression softened. "Been a long time since anyone looked at you like that, hasn't it?" Eleanor couldn't answer past the lump in her throat. That night after supper, Jake asked if she'd like to see the sun set from the hill outside town. "Best view in Nevada," he promised. They rode double on his horse, Eleanor awkward at first with the closeness, then gradually relaxing against his solid presence. The hill overlooked the entire valley, with the town spread below them like a child's toys and the desert stretching endlessly beyond. "It's beautiful," Eleanor breathed, watching the sky turn from gold to orange to deep purple. "Used to come to places like this when I was scouting," Jake said. "Helps put things in perspective. Makes you realize how big the world is, how many possibilities there are." "I used to dream about leaving," Eleanor admitted, "going somewhere where nobody knew me, where I could be someone different." "Why didn't you?" "With what money? And to go where? A woman alone with no resources. She shrugged. The devil you know seems safer than the devils you don't. You're not alone now, Jake said softly. She turned to look at him. This man who'd appeared in her life like something out of the dime novels she used to read. The setting sun caught the planes of his face, softening the hard edges. Why do you care what happens to me? She asked. He was quiet for a long moment, looking out at the vast desert. Maybe because I've been running from my own ghosts for so long. I forgot what it felt like to stand still, to fight for something instead of just surviving. He looked at her then. You remind me that there's still good in the world worth protecting. The ride back was quiet, but it was a comfortable silence. At the boarding house, Jake walked her to the door. Same arrangement as last night? He asked. I'll be next door if you need anything. Jake, she struggled to find the words. Today was... I haven't felt this human in years. You deserve to feel human every day. Eleanor, never let anyone tell you different. That night, as she prepared for bed, Eleanor found herself looking forward to sleep instead of dreading it. She could hear Jake moving around next door, the now familiar sounds of his presence. Safety. She realized this is what safety felt like. She had just blown out her lamp when she heard it, horses approaching fast, too many of them. Her blood turned to ice as rough voices carried through her window. Morrison and his friends, drunk and looking for trouble. Before she could even think to move, she heard Jake's door open, his boots on the stairs. Through her window, she watched him step onto the porch. No hurry in his movements, rifle held casually but ready. Evening, boys, Jake said calmly. Bit late for a social call. We got business with you, Sullivan. Morrison slurred. You cost me face. Can't let that stand. You cost yourself face when you acted like a brute. I just held up the mirror. Eleanor crept to her door, cracking it open. Mrs. Caldwell was in the hallway, a shotgun in her capable hands. Stay inside, dear. The older woman whispered. Jake knows what he's doing. Through the window, Eleanor watched the confrontation unfold. 5 men, all armed, all drunk enough to be dangerous. Jake stood alone, apparently unconcerned. 5 against 1, Jake observed. About what I'd expect from you. Morrison. Get him, boys, Morrison shouted. What happened next was almost too fast to follow. Jake's rifle spat fire, and Morrison's gun flew from his hand. Before the others could react, Jake had worked the lever, putting a bullet in the dirt at each man's feet, driving them back. The next ones won't be warning. Jake announced, You boys have 2 choices. Ride out now and keep riding, or stay and feed the buzzards. What's it going to be? Morrison clutched his bleeding hand, rage and fear warring on his face. But he'd seen Jake's speed, his accuracy. Drunk as he wasn't drunk enough to face certain death. This ain't over, he snarled, but he was already backing toward his horse. Yes, it is, Jake replied. You come near Eleanor again. You even think about causing her trouble, and I'll hunt you down like the rabid dog you are. That's not a threat, Morrison, that's a promise. They rode away, Morrison's curses fading into the night. Jake stayed on the porch until the hoofbeats disappeared completely, then turned to find Eleanor in the doorway. You all right? He asked. She nodded, unable to speak. He'd faced down 5 men for her, without hesitation, without fear. He'd put himself between her and danger. Try to get some rest, he said gently. They won't be back tonight. How can you be sure? Because Morrison's a coward, and cowards don't come back when they know what's waiting for them. He paused at his door. But I'll be listening, just in case. Eleanor returned to her room, her heart still racing, but as she lay in bed, listening to Jake's steady footsteps next door, she felt that strange sense of safety returning. He'd stood guard over her, just as he'd promised. In his arms, no, in his protection, she could rest. Tonight you'll rest in my arms, she whispered, remembering his stumbled words from the night before. Had he meant to say it? The thought sent an unfamiliar warmth through her chest, as sleep claimed her for the second night in a row. Eleanor allowed herself to wonder, just for a moment, what it might be like if those words were more than just a figure of speech. What it might be like to truly rest in Jake Sullivan's arms, to find peace not just in his protection but in his embrace. The thought followed her into dreams that, for once, were filled with possibilities instead of fears. 3 weeks passed in a rhythm Eleanor had never known, peaceful mornings, productive days, and restful nights. She'd grown stronger on Mrs. Caldwell's good food and honest work, and the shadows under her eyes had faded. Jake remained a constant presence, taking odd jobs around town while keeping a watchful eye on her safety. "You can't stay here forever," Eleanor said one morning as they shared coffee on the boarding house porch. "Don't you have somewhere to be? Cattle to drive?" Jake studied his cup. "Season's over for driving. Besides, I like it here." "In Redemption Creek?" She laughed. "Nobody likes Redemption Creek." "I like the company," he said simply, and Eleanor felt that familiar warmth bloom in her chest. That afternoon, Jake surprised her. "Ever been outside the town limits? Really outside, I mean." "No, never had reason to." "Come on then, Mrs. Caldwell gave you the afternoon off. Let's go see some country." They rode double again, heading west toward the mountains. Jake had packed a simple lunch in his saddlebags, and they stopped by a stream lined with cottonwoods, a splash of green in the endless brown landscape. "This is my thinking spot," Jake explained, helping her down from the horse. "Found it my second day here." They sat on a flat rock by the water, sharing bread and cheese while the horse grazed nearby. Eleanor removed her shoes and stockings, gasping as she dipped her toes in the cold mountain water. "When I was little," she said, "before the fever came, we lived by a stream like this in Missouri. Papa would take me fishing, and Mama would pack lunches." She trailed off, lost in memory. "Tell me about them." Jake encouraged. So she did, for the first time in years. Eleanor spoke about her parents, her father's laugh, her mother's singing, the little farmhouse with morning glories climbing the porch. Jake listened without interrupting, letting her words flow like the stream beside them. "They sound like good people," he said when she finished. They would have liked you." The words slipped out before she could stop them, and she blushed. Jake smiled, a real smile that transformed his weathered face. "I'd have been honored to know them." As the afternoon wore on, he taught her to skip stones across the water, laughing when her first attempts plunked straight down. She couldn't remember the last time she'd laughed freely, without fear or calculation behind it. "You're different out here," she observed, watching him select another flat stone. "How so?" "Lighter, somehow. Less like you're carrying the world." His stone skipped 7 times before sinking. "Maybe because out here the world feels manageable. It's in towns where things get complicated." "Is that why you keep moving? To avoid complications?" He was quiet for a moment. "Used to be, now." He looked at her. "Now I'm thinking complications might be worth it, if they're the right kind." The sun was starting to sink when they heard the horses. Jake was on his feet instantly, hand on his gun, pushing Eleanor behind him. 4 riders emerged from the desert, rough-looking men Eleanor didn't recognize. Their leader, a scarred man with cold blue eyes, tipped his hat mockingly. "Jake Sullivan," the man drawled. "Been a while. Not long enough. Wade," Jake replied, his voice deadly calm. Eleanor felt him tense beside her. These weren't local troublemakers. These were something worse. "Heard you were in the area." Wade continued. "Thought we should catch up. You still owe us for that business in Tucson." "That business was settled. Your brother drew first. My brother's dead because of you." Wade's hand hovered near his gun. "Blood demands blood." "Not in front of the lady," Jake said firmly. Wade's eyes found Eleanor for the first time, and she shuddered at the speculation in them. "Pretty little thing. This what's keeping you in this dust bowl? Can't say I blame you. Leave her out of this? Oh, but that's not how this works. Sullivan, you took something precious from me. Only fair I return the favor. Jake's gun cleared leather so fast Eleanor barely saw it move. You touch her, you'll be dead before you hit the ground. 4 against 1, even you ain't that fast. Try me. The tension stretched taut as wire. Eleanor could hear her heart thundering, could feel Jake coiled like a spring beside her. One wrong move and they'd both be dead. Then Wade laughed, a sound like gravel in a pan. Not today, Sullivan, but soon, real soon. And maybe I'll pay a visit to that pretty boarding house first. Mrs. Caldwell, isn't it? Nice lady. Be a shame if something happened to her because of you. They wheeled their horses and rode off, leaving dust and dread in their wake. Jake stood frozen until they disappeared over a ridge, then turned to Eleanor, his face carved from stone. Pack your things, he said. You're leaving town tonight. What? No? Eleanor grabbed his arm. I'm not running. This is my home now. This is my fight, not yours. I won't have you caught in the crossfire. Like Mrs. Caldwell? Like anyone else in town who's shown you kindness. Eleanor's fear transformed into anger. You think running keeps people safe? It just means you're not there to protect them. You don't understand. Wade Garrison doesn't make idle threats. He's killed women before, children. He'll burn that boarding house to the ground just to hurt me. Then we face him together. Eleanor. No. She stepped in front of him, forcing him to look at her. You taught me what it feels like to not be afraid, to stand up instead of cowering. Don't ask me to go back to being that scared girl who runs from shadows. Jake's control finally cracked. He pulled her against him, burying his face in her hair. I can't lose you, he whispered. Not you too. Eleanor's arms went around him instinctively. He was shaking. This man who'd faced down 5 drunk cowboys without flinching was shaking at the thought of losing her. You won't, she promised. We'll figure this out, together. They held each other by the stream as shadows lengthened. 2 damaged souls finding strength in shared determination. Finally, Jake pulled back, his hands framing her face. You're sure? Once Wade makes his move, there's no going back. I've never been more sure of anything. She covered his hands with hers. Whatever comes, we face it together. The ride back to town was tense, both of them scanning the horizon for threats. At the boarding house, Jake insisted on checking every room, every window. Mrs. Caldwell took the news with surprising calm. Always knew you were running from something, she told Jake. Decent men don't drift unless they're carrying ghosts. I'll leave tonight, Jake offered. Draw them away. You'll do no such thing. Mrs. Caldwell's voice brooked no argument. This is a respectable establishment, and I won't have guests driven off by ruffians. Besides, I've got that old Sharps rifle of my husband's. Let them come. That night, Jake moved his things to the parlor, positioning himself where he could watch both doors. Eleanor tried to sleep but found herself pacing, remembering Wade's cold eyes. Near midnight, she crept downstairs. Jake sat in the darkness, rifle across his knees, silhouetted against the window. Can't sleep, he asked without turning. Too much thinking. That'll do it. She sat beside him in the darkness. Tell me about Tucson. About Wade's brother. Jake sighed. Ben Garrison. He was robbing a stage I was guarding. Killed the driver. Was about to kill a woman passenger. I stopped him. That's self-defense. Defense of others. Wade doesn't see it that way. To him, blood is blood. Jake's voice was bitter. I've been running from that family for 2 years. Thought I'd finally gotten far enough away. Maybe it's time to stop running. Maybe it is. He looked at her in the dim light. But I need you to promise me something. If things go bad, if I tell you to run, you run. No arguments. No looking back. Jake, promise me. Eleanor, I need to know you'll be safe. She could hear the desperation in his voice, the echo of old losses. I promise, she whispered, hating the lie even as she spoke it. They sat together in the darkness, watching the empty street. Eventually, exhaustion won. and Eleanor dozed against Jake's shoulder. She woke at dawn to find he'd covered her with a blanket, never moving from his post. "Any sign of them?" she asked. "Not yet, but they'll come." He looked at her with red-rimmed eyes. "They always do." Eleanor made coffee while Mrs. Caldwell started breakfast. The boarding house's other guests had been warned, and most had found reasons to visit elsewhere for a few days. The town itself seemed to hold its breath, waiting. It was just after noon when Wade Garrison rode down Main Street. His 3 men spread out behind him. Jake watched from the window, checking his weapons one final time. "Remember your promise," he told Eleanor. She kissed him instead of answering, a desperate press of lips that tasted of fear and determination. "You come back to me, Jake Sullivan. You hear me? You come back." He touched her face once, memorizing it, then walked out to meet his fate. Eleanor and Mrs. Caldwell watched from the windows as Jake strode down the dusty street. He'd left his rifle behind, trusting to his pistols. 4 against 1 in the harsh noon sun. It was like something out of the dime novels, except this was real, and the man she'd come to love might die in the next few minutes. Love. The word hit her like a physical blow. When had gratitude and trust transformed into something deeper? When had this drifting cowboy become her whole world? "He's fast." "Mrs." Caldwell murmured, her Sharps rifle ready at the window. "Maybe the fastest I've ever seen. Have faith, child." In the street, Jake and Wade faced each other, their men spread in a loose semicircle. Words were exchanged, too low to hear. Then, faster than thought, guns appeared and thunder rolled. The gunfire echoed off the buildings like thunder, and Eleanor watched in horror as Jake spun with the impact of a bullet, but he stayed on his feet, his own guns blazing. 2 of Wade's men went down in the first exchange, clutching wounds. Wade himself staggered, blood spreading across his shirt. "Jake!" Eleanor started for the door, but Mrs. Caldwell caught her arm. "Not yet, child. It's not over." The 4th man, who'd hung back, now raised a rifle from behind a water trough. Jake, focused on Wade, didn't see him. Without thinking, Eleanor grabbed the Sharps from Mrs. Caldwell and thrust it through the window. The heavy rifle bucked against her shoulder as she fired, and the bushwhacker tumbled into the dust. Jake turned at the shot, saw Eleanor in the window, and in that moment of distraction, Wade drew a hidden derringer. The small gun cracked, and Jake went down hard. "No!" Eleanor was out the door before Mrs. Caldwell could stop her, running toward Jake's still form. Wade, bleeding badly, tried to raise the derringer again, but his strength failed. He collapsed beside his brother's killer. Justice finally served in the dust of Main Street. Eleanor fell to her knees beside Jake. Blood soaked his shirt in 2 places, shoulder and side. His eyes were closed, his face pale beneath the tan. "Jake, please," she sobbed, pressing her hands against the wounds. "You promised to come back to me. You promised." His eyes fluttered open, focusing with effort. "Eleanor, you were supposed to run." "I'm done running." Tears streamed down her face. "Help! Somebody help!" People emerged from buildings now that the shooting had stopped. Doc Hartwell, who'd been watching from his office, hurried over with his bag. Sheriff Weber stood uselessly nearby, surveying the carnage with his usual ineffectiveness. "Let's get him inside," Doc Hartwell ordered. "Quick now, before he loses more blood." They carried Jake to the boarding house, Eleanor never leaving his side. She held his hand as Doc Hartwell worked, extracting bullets and stitching wounds. Jake drifted in and out of consciousness, sometimes calling for his sister, sometimes for Eleanor. "Will he live?" Eleanor asked when the doctor finished. Doc Hartwell wiped bloody hands on a towel. "The next 24 hours will tell. He's strong, but he's lost a lot of blood. Keep him still, keep the wounds clean, and pray." Eleanor did all 3. She sat by Jake's bed through the afternoon and into the night, cooling his fever with damp cloths, changing bandages, whispering encouragement when he stirred, "Mrs." Caldwell brought food Eleanor couldn't eat, tea that grew cold untouched. You saved his life, Mrs. Caldwell said softly. That shot from the window. Never seen anything like it from someone who's never held a rifle. I couldn't let them kill him. Eleanor's voice was hoarse from crying. He's all I have. No, child. You have yourself. You have strength you're only just discovering. But I understand. The older woman squeezed her shoulder. Love makes us fierce. Through the long night, Eleanor kept vigil. Jake's fever spiked near dawn, and he thrashed in delirium, calling out names she didn't recognize, reliving battles she could only imagine. She held him down gently, singing the lullabies her mother had once sung, until he quieted. As the sun rose on the second day, his fever broke. Jake opened clear eyes and found Eleanor slumped in the chair beside him, her hand still clasping his. "Eleanor," he whispered. She jerked awake, tears of relief flowing fresh. "You're back. Oh, thank God. You're back. Wade. Dead. All of them." She smoothed his hair back from his forehead. "It's over. Jake, you're free." He was quiet for a long moment, processing this. "You shot that man, the one with the rifle. He was going to kill you. You promised to run if things went bad." "I lied." She managed a watery smile. "I'm not sorry." Jake tried to sit up, winced, and fell back. "Stubborn woman. Stubborn man." She countered. "Taking on 4 gunmen alone? What were you thinking?" "I was thinking about keeping you safe, keeping the town safe." His fingers tightened on hers. "When I saw you in that window with the rifle, Eleanor, you could have been killed. So could you. That's what people do when they—" She stopped, suddenly shy. "When they what?" His gray eyes were intent on hers. "When they love someone," she finished quietly. "They fight for them. They refuse to let them face danger alone." Jake was silent so long she wondered if she'd said too much. Then he tugged her hand, drawing her down until she was sitting on the edge of the bed. "I've been running for so long," he said slowly. "I forgot what it felt like to have something worth standing still for, someone worth fighting to come back to. Jake, that first night, when I said you'd rest in my arms, I meant it. Eleanor, not just protection. I want to be the place you find peace, the way you've become mine." Eleanor's tears fell freely now, but they were different tears, healing instead of hurting. "You already are," she whispered. He lifted their joined hands to his lips, kissing her knuckles gently. "When I'm healed, when I can stand before you as a whole man again, I have something to ask you. But for now—" He tugged her down further, until her head rested on his good shoulder. "Rest with me a while." Eleanor carefully arranged herself beside him on the narrow bed, mindful of his wounds. For the first time in her life, she understood what true safety felt like, not just physical protection, but the safety of being known, accepted, loved. "I've never slept peacefully," she murmured against his chest, echoing words from a lifetime ago. "Tonight you'll rest in my arms," he completed, his voice drowsy but content. "Every night, if you'll have me." The town of Redemption Creek slowly returned to normal over the following days. The story of the showdown spread, growing with each telling. Jake Sullivan became something of a legend, the drifter who'd stood up to killers to protect the town. Eleanor's shot from the window became part of the tale, though she tried to discourage the embellishments. Hackett, faced with the town's shifting sympathies and the loss of his hired muscle, sold the silver dollar and left for California. The new owner, a respectable family man from back east, turned it into a proper restaurant. Sheriff Weber, shamed by his cowardice during the crisis, resigned his badge and left town as well. As Jake recovered, he and Eleanor spent their days planning a future neither had dared imagine before. He had money saved from years of drifting, enough to buy a small ranch outside town, nothing fancy but with good water and grazing. "It'll be hard work," he warned. "Building something from nothing always is." "I'm not afraid of hard work." Eleanor replied, "I'm not afraid of anything anymore." That wasn't entirely true. She still woke sometimes in the night, heart racing from old nightmares. But now Jake was there to hold her, to remind her that the past had no power over her future. And gradually, the nightmares came less often. 3 weeks after the shooting, Jake was finally strong enough to walk without support. That evening, he asked Eleanor to meet him on the hill overlooking the valley, their spot. She'd come to think of it. She found him there at sunset, standing straight despite the healing wounds, looking out over the desert. When he turned to her, his expression was more vulnerable than she'd ever seen it. "Eleanor Whitfield," he began, then stopped, running a hand through his hair. "I had a whole speech planned, but now—" She waited, her heart thundering. "I'm not good with words," he continued. "Better with actions. So let me say it plain. I love you. Have since that first night when you looked at me with those green eyes, and I saw my own loneliness reflected back. You've given me a reason to stop running, to build something lasting. If you'll have me, I'd like to spend the rest of my days making sure you never have another sleepless night." He pulled something from his pocket, a simple gold band that caught the last rays of sun. "It was my mother's," he said. "Been carrying it for years, never knowing why. Now I do. Will you marry me, Eleanor? Will you help me build a life worth living?" Eleanor couldn't speak past the joy flooding her chest. Instead, she answered him the way she'd wanted to since that desperate kiss before the gunfight. She threw her arms around his neck and kissed him properly, pouring all her love and gratitude and hope into the connection. When they finally broke apart, both breathless, she was laughing and crying at once. "Yes," she managed. "Yes to all of it. To you, to the ranch, to the life we'll build together." Jake slipped the ring onto her finger with hands that trembled slightly, the same hands that were rock steady with a gun shook with the emotion of this moment. Then he pulled her close, holding her as the sun set behind them and the stars began to emerge. "No more running," he murmured into her hair. "For either of us." "No more running," she agreed. Then, with a smile in her voice, "Though I might still lose some sleep. Newlyweds do, I'm told." Jake's laugh rumbled through his chest, and Eleanor felt the last of her old fears dissolve. She'd found her safe harbor, her place of rest, and he'd found his home. As they stood together on the hill, the desert spreading endlessly before them and the town lights beginning to twinkle below, Eleanor knew that the promise had been kept. Tonight, and every night to come, she would rest in his arms, not just peacefully, but joyfully, knowing she was exactly where she belonged. The wedding was set for a month hence, giving Jake time to fully heal and Eleanor time to prepare. Mrs. Caldwell threw herself into the planning with enthusiasm, declaring it would be the finest celebration Redemption Creek had seen in years. But peace in frontier towns was always fragile, and the past had a way of reaching out with skeletal fingers just when you thought you were free. It started with small things. Eleanor noticed rough-looking men in town, strangers who watched her too closely when she went to market. Jake found boot prints around the boarding house at night, signs that someone had been watching the windows. Then came the note, slipped under Eleanor's door while she slept. "The Garrisons have a long memory and a longer reach. Blood for blood." Jake's face went stone hard when he read it. "Wade must have had more brothers, cousins maybe. The whole clan is rotten." "We knew this might happen," Eleanor said, though her hands shook as she folded the note. "We knew killing Wade might not end it." "I'll wire the marshal in Carson City." Jake decided. "Get some real law here. That'll take weeks." Eleanor moved to the window, looking out at the dusty street. They won't wait that long. She was right. 2 nights later, Hackett returned to town. Eleanor was closing up the restaurant. She'd taken evening shifts there since the new owner arrived. When the door chimed, she looked up with a ready smile that died on her lips. Samuel Hackett stood in the doorway, but he wasn't the same man who'd fled town weeks ago. His clothes were trail-worn, his face gaunt, and his eyes held a wild light that spoke of desperation and hate. "Hello, Ellie," he said, stepping inside and turning the lock. "Miss me? The restaurant's closed. she managed, backing toward the kitchen. "You need to leave." "Leave?" He laughed, an ugly sound. "I owned you, girl. Bought and paid for. Then that drifter came and ruined everything. Cost me my business, my reputation, my future. You ruined those things yourself." His hand cracked across her face, sending her stumbling into a table. "Don't you dare talk back to me. You were nothing when I took you in. Nothing!" "And this is how you repay me?" Eleanor tasted blood, felt the familiar paralysis of fear trying to take hold. But then she remembered Jake's words. "You're stronger than you know." She remembered the weight of the Sharp's rifle in her hands, the surge of power when she'd pulled the trigger to save the man she loved. "I was never yours," she said, straightening despite the pain. "I was never anybody's property." Hackett's face contorted with rage. He lunged for her, but Eleanor was ready. She grabbed the coffee pot from the counter and swung it with all her strength. It connected with a satisfying crash, sending Hackett reeling. "You little—" He pulled a knife from his belt, the blade gleaming in the lamplight. Eleanor ran. Through the kitchen, out the back door, into the alley. But Hackett was right behind her, cursing and stumbling but driven by obsessive fury. She turned toward Main Street, toward help, but he caught her sleeve, spinning her around. The knife flashed down. Eleanor threw up her arm instinctively, crying out as the blade sliced through fabric and flesh. Then thunder roared, and Hackett jerked backward, the knife falling from nerveless fingers. Jake stood at the alley mouth, gun smoking. Behind him, half the town seemed to have appeared, drawn by the gunshot. "Eleanor." Jake was beside her in seconds, examining her bleeding arm. "How bad?" "It's not deep," she gasped, though the pain made her eyes water. "Jake, there are others. The note. Hackett must have made a deal with them." "I know." His eyes were ice cold as he looked at Hackett's still form. "Mrs. Caldwell saw riders heading for the ranch. I came to get you, to keep you safe while I deal with them." "No." Eleanor gripped his shirt with her good hand. "No more splitting up. We face them together, remember? Eleanor, you're hurt. I can still shoot." She met his gaze steadily. "That ranch is our future. I won't let them take it." Doc Hartwell pushed through the crowd, immediately tending to Eleanor's arm. "Need stitches. But she's right, it's not deep. Lucky." While the doctor worked, Jake questioned the gathering crowd. Several people had seen the strangers, 5 men who'd made camp outside town and spent their days watching, waiting. Classic intimidation tactics. "They're trying to draw me out," Jake said. "Make me come to them on their terms." "Then we change the terms," Eleanor said through gritted teeth as Doc Hartwell finished the stitches. "We bring the fight to them." An hour later, a small convoy headed for Jake's ranch, Jake and Eleanor on horseback. Mrs. Caldwell driving a wagon with Doc Hartwell and, surprisingly, several townspeople who decided they'd had enough of outsiders threatening their peace. "You don't owe us anything," Jake had protested. "You stood up for this town," replied Thomas Henderson from the general store. "Time we returned the favor." They smelled smoke before they saw the ranch. Jake spurred his horse faster, Eleanor right beside him despite her bandaged arm. They crested the rise to see flames licking at the barn Jake had just finished building, and 5 men standing in the yard, watching it burn. "Sullivan," the leader called out as they approached. "Knew that would bring you running. I'm Marcus Garrison, Wade's cousin. You killed him and 2 of our kin. Now we take everything you care about." Jake dismounted slowly, Eleanor beside him. The townspeople spread out behind them, guns visible but not drawn. "Yet, your kin were killers and thieves," Jake said calmly. "They got what they deserved." "Maybe so," Marcus admitted. "But family is family. Can't let their deaths go unanswered." His eyes found Eleanor. "Pretty little thing. Wade told me about her in his last letter, said she'd be the key to making you suffer. You touch her and I'll kill you where you stand," Jake said simply. "Big talk for a man outnumbered." Marcus stopped, finally noticing the armed townspeople behind Jake and Eleanor. His confidence wavered. You're not dealing with just us, Eleanor said, stepping forward despite Jake's warning hand. You're threatening our town, our home. These people are our neighbors, our friends. You want a war? You've got one. The standoff stretched taut. 5 gunmen against a ragtag group of shopkeepers and citizens, led by a wounded woman and a man who'd already been shot twice in the last month. It should have been no contest. But Marcus Garrison hadn't counted on the power of community, the strength of people defending their own. He hadn't counted on Eleanor Whitfield, who'd found her courage and refused to let it go. "This isn't worth dying for," Doc Hartwell called out. "You've burned a barn. That can be rebuilt. But if you push this further, men will die. Maybe you, maybe us, but certainly someone." "Is your cousin's memory worth that?" Marcus looked at his men, saw the same uncertainty in their faces. They'd expected easy prey, not organized resistance. "Jake Sullivan," he called. "Face me one-on-one. You win. We ride away and the Garrison family forgets you exist. I win. We take the girl and leave you to bury her. Fair?" "No!" Eleanor started forward, but Jake caught her. "It's the best offer we'll get," he said quietly. "One fight to end it all? Jake, you're barely healed. I'm healed enough." He cupped her face gently. "Trust me." She did trust him, but that didn't stop the fear that clenched her heart as he walked forward to meet Marcus Garrison in the flickering light of the burning barn. The 2 men faced each other, hands hovering over their guns. Marcus was younger, fresher, uninjured, but Jake had something Marcus didn't, something worth fighting for. "Draw when you're ready," Jake said calmly. Marcus went for his gun, fast and smooth. But Jake was faster, his draw the lightning-quick motion of a man who'd survived 100 such encounters. 2 shots rang out almost as one. Marcus Garrison stood for a moment, looking surprised at the spreading red on his shirt. Then he toppled backward into the dust. "Anyone else?" Jake asked, his gun still in his hand, still steady despite everything. The remaining Garrison men looked at each other, then at the armed townspeople, then at their dead leader. Without a word, they mounted their horses and rode away, leaving their cousin's body behind. Eleanor ran to Jake, throwing her arms around him despite her injury. He held her tight, his gun hand finally trembling now that the danger had passed. "It's over," he murmured. "It's finally over." The townspeople helped fight the barn fire, saving most of the structure. As they worked together in the flame-lit darkness, Eleanor felt something she'd never experienced, the warmth of belonging, of being part of something larger than herself. "We'll help you rebuild, Mrs. Caldwell declared. "Barn raising next Saturday. I'll coordinate the food. I'll donate lumber." Henderson added, "Consider it a wedding present." As dawn broke over the damaged but still standing ranch, Jake and Eleanor stood together, surrounded by friends and neighbors who'd risked their lives for them. The past, with all its ghosts and pain, finally felt truly buried. "Still want to marry a man with this much trouble in his wake?" Jake asked, exhaustion clear in his voice. Eleanor looked at their future, the ranch that would need rebuilding, the life that would need careful tending, the community that had claimed them as their own. She thought of all the nights she'd lain awake, afraid and alone, never dreaming such a life was possible. "More than ever," she said firmly. "Though I might ask Mrs. Caldwell to teach me to shoot properly. Seems I'll need the skill." Jake laughed, pulling her close. "That's my fierce Eleanor. Together, there's nothing we can't face." As their neighbors headed back to town, making plans for the barn raising and the wedding, Jake and Eleanor remained. They sat on the porch of their future home, watching the sun rise over the desert, painting the world in shades of gold and possibility. "No more running," Eleanor said softly. "No more fear. Just this, building something good and strong and lasting. Together," Jake agreed, pressing a kiss to her temple. The desert wind carried away the last smoke from the fire, and with it, the last shadows of their past. Whatever came next, they would face it side by side. Two souls who'd found peace in each other's arms and the courage to fight for their chance at happiness. The barn raising drew nearly everyone in Redemption Creek. By sunrise, wagons were arriving at the ranch, loaded with lumber, tools, and enough food to feed an army. Eleanor stood on the porch, overwhelmed by the generosity of people who just months ago had barely acknowledged her existence. "Never seen anything like it," Jake murmured beside her, his arms still tender but functional. "In all my years drifting, I never saw a community come together like this." Mrs. Caldwell bustled up, directing the placement of food tables. "That's because you never stayed long enough to become part of one," she said tartly. "Community isn't just about place, it's about connection. You two gave folks something to believe in, showed them standing up for what's right matters." As the men began framing the barn, Eleanor worked with the women, serving food and tending minor injuries. Her arm had healed well, leaving only a thin scar, another mark of survival. Jake called it, kissing the pale line when they were alone. Young Timothy Henderson, the store owner's son, approached shyly. "Miss Eleanor, my PA says you shot a man to save Mr. Jake, says you were brave as any soldier." Eleanor knelt to the boy's level. "I was scared," she admitted. "But sometimes we do brave things because we're scared of losing something precious. Could you teach me to shoot when I'm older? If your parents agree." Eleanor smiled. "But Timothy, the real courage isn't in knowing how to use a gun. It's knowing when not to." The boy nodded solemnly and scampered off. Eleanor stood to find Jake watching her, that soft expression that still made her heart flutter. "You'll make a fine mother someday," he said quietly. The thought sent a different flutter through her, hope mixed with old fear. Could she dare dream of such normalcy, of children raised in safety and love? "Someday," she agreed, taking his hand. By afternoon, the barn's frame stood tall against the sky. Men who'd initially kept their distance from Jake now worked beside him, sharing stories and flask-passed whiskey. The transformation was remarkable. The dangerous drifter had become a respected rancher, one of their own. Sheriff Weber's replacement arrived during the raising, a younger man named Collins from Austin, with clear eyes and a reputation for honest dealing. He sought out Jake during a water break. "Heard about your troubles with the Garrison clan," Collins said directly. "Also heard how you handled it. Town like this needs men willing to stand up. Ever consider wearing a deputy's badge?" Jake nearly choked on his water. "I'm no lawman. Maybe not by training, but by inclination. You've already been keeping the peace." Collins gestured at the busy ranch. "Think about it. Part-time work, decent pay, and it would help folks feel even safer knowing you're official." Eleanor watched Jake wrestle with the offer. The old Jake would have rejected anything tying him down. But this Jake, her Jake, was learning to plant roots. "I'll consider it," he said finally. As sunset approached, the barn stood complete but for the roof. Tomorrow's work, the men declared, gathering for supper. Tables groaned under the weight of pot pies, fresh bread, preserved fruits, and 3 different types of cake. "Speech," someone called out. "Let's hear from the soon-to-be-married couple." Jake looked like he'd rather face another gunfight, but Eleanor squeezed his hand and stood, drawing him up with her. "We don't have fancy words," she began, her voice carrying across the gathering. "But we have grateful hearts. Months ago, I was—" She paused, choosing her words carefully. "Lost, trapped in darkness I thought would never end. Then Jake arrived, bringing light I'd forgotten existed." She looked at the assembled faces, people who'd witnessed her transformation, who'd chosen to support rather than judge. "You all gave us more than help rebuilding a barn. You gave us belonging. Home isn't just land or buildings. It's this, people who show up, who stand together, who choose community over isolation." Jake cleared his throat. "I've drifted most of my life, running from shadows, telling myself I was protecting others by staying alone. Eleanor taught me that real protection comes from connection, from having something worth defending. You all taught me that strength multiplies when shared. He raised his glass of water. He'd sworn off whiskey since the shooting, wanting clear heads and steady hands for the life they were building. To Redemption Creek. He toasted. May she live up to her name for all of us. The cheer that went up could probably be heard in town. As people mingled and music started, Henderson had brought his fiddle. Eleanor found herself pulled into conversations, included in planning for the town's future. Women who'd once whispered about the saloon girl now sought her opinions on everything from recipes to raising chickens. "You're glowing," Jake observed, finding her during a quiet moment. "I never imagined this," she admitted. "Even in my best dreams, I never imagined feeling so accepted, valued." "You were always valuable," Jake said firmly. "Others are just catching up to what I saw that first night." Doc Hartwell approached, looking pleased. "Good news for you both. The town council met yesterday. Officially, for once, they voted to fund a proper school. Mrs. Caldwell suggested you might be interested in teaching. Eleanor, you're one of the few women in town with formal education." Eleanor's breath caught. "Teaching? Think about it," the doctor encouraged. "Children need someone who understands overcoming hardship. Someone patient and kind. Payments modest, but steady." As the doctor moved away, Eleanor turned to Jake in wonder. "Teacher? Me? Why not? You taught me plenty. How to stay still, how to trust, how to build instead of destroy." He pulled her into the shadow of the new barn. "Speaking of building, Collins offered me that deputy position. Regular income would help with the ranch, and—" "Take it," Eleanor interrupted. "Jake, this is how we become truly part of this place. Not just hiding out, but contributing." He studied her face. "You're sure? Wearing a badge paints a target. You've been a target since you arrived, at least this way. You're a target with backup and legal authority." They was quiet for a moment, listening to the fiddle music and laughter, watching their neighbors and friends celebrate under stars just beginning to appear. "Reverend Morrison arrives next week for the wedding." Eleanor said, "Mrs. Caldwell has my dress nearly finished. Are you ready?" "Been ready since that night you asked me to stay." Jake admitted, "Every day since has been borrowed time I never expected to have." Not borrowed," Eleanor corrected. "Earned. We both earned this chance." As if summoned by talk of chances, young Amy Morrison, no relation to Tom, approached shyly. She was 15, worked at the general store, and had always been kind to Eleanor even during the darkest days. "Miss Eleanor, I was wondering, that is, my ma said I should ask. Could you teach me to read better? I can manage some, but—" She trailed off, embarrassed. "Of course," Eleanor said warmly. "We'll start tomorrow if you'd like. The boarding house parlor should work." Amy beamed and hurried away. Jake chuckled. "Teacher all ready, and school's not even built yet." "Practice," Eleanor said. Then, more seriously, "I want to help other girls avoid my path. Education opens doors, gives choices. If I can do that for even one person, you'll do it for many." Jake predicted, "This town's children don't know how lucky they're about to be." The party continued late into the night, but Jake and Eleanor slipped away as the moon rose. They walked to their spot on the hill, looking down at their ranch. Barn standing proud. House waiting to be filled with life. Friends' wagons circled like a protective embrace. No more nightmares lately, Eleanor observed. "First time in my life I can say that." "Mine are fading too," Jake admitted. "Harder to be haunted when you're busy building futures instead of running from pasts." They sat in comfortable silence, Eleanor leaning against Jake's shoulder. The desert stretched endlessly before them, but it no longer seemed empty or threatening. It seemed full of possibility. "Thank you," Eleanor said suddenly. "For what?" "For seeing me. Not the broken saloon girl, not the victim. You saw who I could be and gave me space to become her. You did the same for me," Jake pointed out. "Saw past the drifter to the man who wanted to stop drifting." Eleanor smiled. "Then we saved each other. Best gunfight I ever won. Jake agreed, pressing a kiss to her hair. Below them, the last wagons were preparing to leave. Neighbors calling goodnight and promises to return tomorrow for the roof. The barn stood skeletal but strong in the moonlight, a testament to what community could build. "One more week," Eleanor murmured. "One more week, and I'll be Eleanor Sullivan." "Has a nice sound," Jake agreed. "Eleanor Sullivan. Teacher, wife, strongest woman in Nevada. Partner to Jake Sullivan. Deputy and rancher, bravest man I know. They helped each other stand. Both still healing, always would be in some ways, and made their way down the hill. Tomorrow would bring more work on the barn. Lessons with Amy, planning for the wedding and the school and the future stretching bright before them. But tonight, Eleanor would sleep peacefully in the boarding house, knowing Jake was near, knowing she was safe and loved and part of something bigger than survival. She would rest without fear, without nightmares, without the crushing weight of being alone. The morning of the wedding dawned clear and bright, with the kind of pristine blue sky that made the desert look like paradise. Eleanor stood before the mirror in Mrs. Caldwell's best room, barely recognizing the woman looking back at her. The ivory dress, simple but elegant, had been crafted with loving care, and her hair was pinned up with small wildflowers Amy Morrison had gathered at dawn. "You're a vision," Mrs. Caldwell declared, tears threatening. "Your mother would be so proud." Eleanor touched the small daguerreotype pinned inside her bouquet, her parents' wedding photo, traveling with her to this new beginning. "I think they would have loved Jake," she said softly. "Hard not to love a man who'd take on the whole world for you." Mrs. Caldwell agreed, adjusting Eleanor's veil. "Now, let's get you married." The church was packed. It seemed all of Redemption Creek had turned out, cramming into pews and standing along the walls. Eleanor paused at the doorway, overwhelmed. Just months ago, these same people had looked through her like she was invisible. Now they smiled, dabbed at tears, and whispered how beautiful she looked. Jake waited at the altar, looking uncomfortable in his new suit but devastating in Eleanor's eyes. His gray gaze found hers across the church, and everything else faded away. Sheriff Collins stood as his best man. The deputy's badge Jake now wore on weekdays polished and tucked in Collins' pocket for safekeeping. The walk down the aisle felt both endless and too quick. Then Jake was taking her hands, his touch grounding her in the moment. "Dearly beloved," Reverend Morrison began, his voice carrying clearly, "we gather today to witness something precious. Not just the union of two souls, but the triumph of love over adversity, hope over despair, and community over isolation." Eleanor barely heard the traditional words that followed. She was lost in Jake's eyes, in the miracle of standing here whole and hopeful when both of them had been so broken. "The couple has written their own vows," the Reverend announced. Jake cleared his throat, his hands tightening on Eleanor's. "Eleanor May Whitfield, you gave me a reason to stop running. You showed me that courage isn't about facing danger alone. It's about letting others stand beside you. You taught me that home isn't a place you find. It's something you build, one choice at a time. I promise to be your shelter in storms, your partner in peace, and your steadfast companion on whatever trails lie ahead. I promise you'll never face another dark night alone." Eleanor was crying, not caring who saw. When she found her voice, it was steady and sure. "Jake Sullivan, you saw me when I'd become invisible to myself. You offered protection when I'd forgotten I deserved protecting. You gave me courage to reclaim my life and strength to build something new. I promise to be your anchor when old ghosts call you to drift, your light when darkness threatens, and your fierce defender against any who'd threaten our peace. I promise you'll always have someone to come home to." "The rings," Reverend Morrison prompted. Amy Morrison stepped forward as Eleanor's attendant, beaming as she handed over Jake's mother's ring and the simple band Eleanor had chosen for Jake. The metal was warm, as if carrying the hopes of all who'd worn them before. "By the power vested in me by God and the territory of Nevada, I now pronounce you husband and wife. Jake, you may kiss your bride." The kiss was gentle, reverent, a promise sealed before witnesses. The church erupted in cheers and applause as they turned to face their community as a married couple. Eleanor felt the last chains of her past fall away. The reception filled the churchyard and spilled into the street. Tables groaned under food contributed by every household. Henderson had closed the store early, declaring it a town holiday. Even the saloon's new owner had contributed, though he served only coffee and lemonade in Eleanor's honor. "First dance," someone called, and space cleared as Jake led Eleanor to the makeshift floor. "I should warn you," he murmured as the fiddle started. "I haven't danced since before the war." "Then we'll learn together," Eleanor replied, stepping into his arms. They swayed more than danced, but no one minded. Other couples soon joined them, and the celebration took on a life of its own. Eleanor danced with Sheriff Collins, Doc Hartwell, even shy Timothy Henderson standing on her feet. Jake partnered Mrs. Caldwell, Amy Morrison, and every woman who'd contributed to the wedding. As the sun began to set, painting the desert in shades of gold and crimson, Jake and Eleanor slipped away to the ranch. Friends had decorated the little house with ribbons and wildflowers. Someone, probably Mrs. Caldwell, had left fresh bread, preserves, and a pot of stew warming on the stove. Home, Eleanor breathed, standing in the doorway of what was now truly theirs. Home, Jake agreed, sweeping her into his arms despite her laughing protests. "Tradition demands I carry you over the threshold. Mrs. Sullivan." "Far be it from me to break tradition. Mr. Sullivan." Inside, the house felt different, fuller somehow, as if the ceremony had blessed not just their union, but the space they'd inhabit. Eleanor moved through the rooms, touching familiar objects that seemed new in this context, her mother's shawl draped over a chair, Jake's rifle mounted above the fireplace, 2 lives merging into one. "No regrets?" Jake asked, watching her explore. "How could I regret the best day of my life?" Eleanor turned to him, still in her wedding dress but with her hair starting to escape its pins. "Do you? Only that it took so long to find you." He crossed to her, framing her face with gentle hands. "All those years drifting, I was looking for something I couldn't name. Turns out I was looking for you." They stood in their little parlor as night fell over the desert, holding each other and marveling at the journey that had brought them here. Outside, coyotes called to the rising moon, but the sound no longer seemed lonely. It was just part of the vast, wild world they'd claimed a corner of. "I should start supper," Eleanor said eventually, though she made no move to leave his arms. "Mrs. Caldwell left enough food for days," Jake pointed out. "Besides, I have a different suggestion for our first night as husband and wife." He led her to the bedroom, where someone had placed fresh flowers on the dresser and turned down the quilts. Moonlight streamed through the windows, painting everything in silver. "You're trembling," Jake observed, touching her cheek. "Not from fear," Eleanor assured him. "Just, I never imagined I'd be here, safe, loved, wanting instead of enduring. You'll never have to endure again," Jake promised. "Only choose, and if you choose to wait—" Eleanor silenced him with a kiss, pouring all her trust and desire and joy into the connection. When they parted, her eyes were bright with unshed tears. "I choose you," she whispered, "tonight and always." Later, as they lay entwined in the moonlight, Eleanor traced lazy patterns on Jake's chest. "Tell me about tomorrow," she said. "Tell me about all our tomorrows." "Tomorrow, I'll wake up beside my wife," Jake began, his voice rumbling beneath her ear. "I'll make coffee while you burn the eggs. I've gotten better at cooking. Then I'll kiss you goodbye before heading to town for my deputy rounds. You'll teach Amy and whoever else shows up for lessons. I'll come home for lunch because I can't stay away that long. Evenings. We'll work the ranch together. Nights." He pressed a kiss to her hair. "Nights we'll fall asleep knowing we're exactly where we belong." "And the day after?" "Same thing, with variations. Maybe we'll ride to that stream, pack a picnic. Maybe I'll help you plan lessons for the new school. Maybe we'll just sit on the porch and watch the sunset. Every day a small miracle. built from ordinary moments. Eleanor smiled against his skin. I like our tomorrows. What about you? Jake asked. What do you see? She thought for a moment. Children, eventually, teaching them to read on winter evenings, watching them grow strong and unafraid in this place we're building, the ranch prospering, the town growing, us growing old together, sitting on that porch you mentioned, still holding hands when we're gray and creaky. That's a future worth fighting for. We already did fight for it. Now we get to live it. They fell silent, listening to the night sounds of their land, their home. Somewhere in the darkness, a nightingale sang, its liquid notes carrying across the desert. Eleanor, Jake said softly, I've never slept peacefully. She finished for him, smiling. I know, neither have I. But tonight I'll rest in your arms, she said, settling more firmly against him. Tomorrow night too, and every night after that, always. Jake agreed. You'll rest in my arms always. As sleep claimed them, deep, peaceful sleep unmarred by old terrors, the desert wind whispered around their little house. It carried the scent of sage and possibility, of new beginnings carved from harsh land and harder pasts. In the morning, they would wake to their first full day as husband and wife. There would be challenges ahead, droughts and storms, lean years and times of plenty. The nightmares might return occasionally, shadows creeping in when defenses were low, but they would face it all together. Two souls who had found in each other not just love, but home. For now, they slept entwined in their marriage bed, breathing in synchronized rhythm. The woman who'd never known peace and the man who'd run from it had found what they'd been seeking all along. A place to rest, arms to hold them, and the promise of tomorrow stretching bright and endless as the desert sky. Outside, the stars wheeled overhead, ancient witnesses to another love story written in the dust and dreams of the American frontier, and in a little ranch house where the desert met the mountains, two hearts beat as one, finally and forever at peace. I've never slept so peacefully, Eleanor murmured in her dreams. You'll rest in my arms, always, Jake whispered back. Even in sleep keeping his promise, the end had become their beginning, and every sunrise would bring new chapters to their story, a story of redemption, courage, and the transformative power of love in the wild, untamed West. Thank you for listening to this Wild West love story. Where are you enjoying this tale from? Leave a comment below and let's connect. Don't forget to subscribe to From Wild West channel and share your thoughts about Eleanor and Jake's journey. Your support helps us bring more stories of love, courage, and redemption from the American frontier.